Fine, walk out. You'll be begging within a week without me. My wife laughed at me as worthless, unaware I had already exposed her secrets and set every detail in motion. So when I ultimately left, her career, her relatives, and her whole financial life crumbled. What if the person you thought was a mouse was actually a lion, meticulously planning your downfall? Monica found out the hard way that when the quiet ones finally leave, they don't just walk out, they dismantle everything they ever built with you. Go ahead, leave. You won't survive a week without me. That sentence, sharp and cold, sliced through the kitchen like a razor. It just hung there, an invisible weapon in the air. Monica didn't yell it. She didn't cry. No, she said it with that familiar, venomous smirk, that smug tilt of her head she'd perfected over the years. It was a look of equal parts arrogant boredom, the same one she'd used when she told her sister that Daniel used to be charming, before he got so bland. Daniel stood on the other side of the kitchen island, still in his polo shirt and khakis. He hadn't even finished his trip to the hardware store. He'd just gone to pick up some replacement bulbs for the backyard lights she'd mentioned were burned out. And then, back in the living room, she'd dropped that casual remark. You treat retirement like it's a job. You know nobody's grading you anymore, right? He hadn't responded. He just kept arranging the bulbs in their box, carefully, almost like he was organizing evidence. And now, here in his kitchen, in the house he'd built with his own money, brick by brick, upgrade by upgrade, she was daring him to leave. Laughing, almost, like she was testing a bluff. You think I don't see how you've been moping around since your precious business sold? Poor Dan. Nothing to do but arrange screws and pretend it's still useful. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys, one for the front door, one for his truck, one for the safe. He set them gently on the countertop, like a man laying down his arms, or maybe a man laying down a gauntlet. Monica blinked. A flicker of something. Wait, really? Still no response from Daniel. No eye roll, no sarcastic comeback. He just looked at her for a long, silent second, like he was seeing a painting that once meant the world to him, but was now cracked and faded by the years. And then he turned, and he walked out. No suitcase, no dramatic slam of the door. No, you'll regret this. He just left. The light bulbs were still on the table. The patio lights still needed fixing. She stood there for a moment, frozen, as if waiting for him to turn around and say something witty, some dry retort. But the door stayed shut. The silence stretched. She poured another glass of wine, a slow, deliberate movement, and muttered, "Drama queen." What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed in her most boozy fantasies, was that Daniel hadn't just left to cool off. He wasn't at the holiday and Googling marriage counseling or sleeping in his truck like some sad country song. No, he was already gone. Not just physically, but strategically. The quiet man she married, the one who handled the taxes and the paperwork because he actually enjoys that stuff, had spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment. Quietly, carefully, invisibly, while Monica was browsing condos in Costa Rica and calling her father for another short-term loan for a little breathing room, Daniel had been adjusting names on accounts, consolidating assets, refiling old paperwork from when he helped bail out her father's real estate firm during that quiet little downturn 2 years back. She called him paranoid for keeping hard copies, obsessive for tracking every damn penny like some old miser. He wasn't obsessive. He was meticulous. And now, the machinery was already in motion. His truck, a battered but well-maintained Silver Dew, wasn't heading to a motel. It was already parked behind a small, bland bungalow on the edge of town, rented under a trust name. Inside, a coffee pot gurgled, and his old, trusty laptop blinked patiently from the table. Next to it, a folder labeled Trigger Assets, and at the very bottom, under a manila envelope sealed for months, a thin hard copy of the asset guarantee clause Monica never read because, well, Daniel just handles that stuff. He knew she'd mock him eventually. He knew she'd push it too far, and he knew that when it happened, when she made her final mistake, he wouldn't need to shout or cry or plead. He'd just leave, because boring men don't explode. They evaporate, and when they do it right, they take the oxygen with them. The Airbnb was nothing special. Clean, quiet, and beige in a way Monica would have called depressing. Daniel found it comforting. No chatter, no echo of her heels on the floor, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whisper of wind outside. He locked the door, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at the small kitchen table like a man arriving at his office for a normal day's work. It was work. It had been for months. The laptop booted up with a soft click. A familiar screen came to life. Spreadsheet tabs, secure logins, encrypted vaults. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. This was the part he'd rehearsed, the detachment phase. The emotional fuse had been burned out a long time ago, long before Monica's final dare. That was just the closing bell. The folder labeled Trigger Instruments wasn't just digital. He had physical backup stored in a separate P.O. box 2 counties over. Daniel had tested access last month. Everything was working as expected. He opened the bank's portal first. 3 accounts, all tied to one property. His house, technically still jointly owned. But Daniel had maneuvered around that months ago, using a strategic leverage clause buried in a quiet joint guarantee Monica's father had signed during his last cash crunch. "You in these forms," she'd scoffed when Daniel insisted on refinancing the house in her name. "I trust you. Just tell me where to sign." So she did, and so did he. Her father, Richard Costello, had sat on Daniel's deck 2 summers back, bourbon in hand, practically begging for help after a deal in series went south. Daniel hadn't blinked. He'd pulled strings, sold an old asset, and structured a line of credit through an obscure lender that specialized in asset-backed flexibility. But not before adding one important clause: their house. Their house was used as a cross-collateralization instrument tied to Richard's loan package, with Daniel as the primary guarantor. Quiet, invisible, but potent. And today was the activation date. 1 click, revoke primary guarantor status. Confirmation required. Daniel checked the date on the calendar. September 2nd, right on time. He entered the 2-factor code. It pinged a burner phone he bought 6 months ago. Not that he needed it. The code was already written in his notebook under a sticky note that read, "For peace of mind." The final prompt appeared. "Warning, revoking guarantor status will initiate reevaluation of secured collateral on loan ID 32431RC. Continue." He clicked yes. Another prompt. "This action will remove guarantor Daniel Eliabs from primary status and transfer liability to the fallback instrument, residential property at OAC Bank per Appendix 4C of the agreement." Yes, it was done. Just like that. The house was now exposed. It was no longer protected by Daniel's financial profile. It would be reclassified within a week, pending the lending institution's review. And Monica, she had no idea what an acceleration clause was. To her, the house was just paid off. Just a place to post pictures of wine glasses. He opened the second folder, insurance revocation forms. Months ago, he'd bundled the house's protection under a commercial policy tied to his consulting firm. That policy was canceled last week. The state requirement would default to Monica's name, if she even noticed the renewal notice buried in the mail. If she didn't, that was her problem. Next tab, the LLC. Back in March, Daniel had quietly set up a shell corporation called Millima Vessel Holdings, with himself as the anonymous executive commissary. Its purpose: to hold the remaining funds from the asset sale, untouchable, non-marital, designated as post-nuptial assets. He had filed it all with a smile, imagining Monica calling it weird prepper nonsense if she'd even found the paperwork. She didn't. She was too busy scrolling Instagram, captioning beach photos with "manifesting luxury," while the financial walls around her were already being hollowed out. He moved to the last step, the file labeled MC__revoke.pdf. Monica Costello Jacobs, spousal cosigner financial authority revocation, formally stripped of access to all joint holdings, effective 10:47 p.m. this evening. He opened the document, read the last line. "This action is irrevocable unless rescinded by the primary party with the unanimous consent of the Asset Holding Board of Directors." Daniel smiled slightly. He was the board of directors. He signed the digital form, dated it, uploaded it. Then he leaned back, closed the laptop, and drank his now warm water. No fireworks, no dramatic music, just a soft quiet. The kind of quiet men like him worked for decades to afford. Monica had dated him to leave. She never asked what he'd be taking with him. The answer: everything she didn't know he was holding up. Monica woke up at 7:32 a.m. to the nagging buzz of her Apple Watch reminding her to hydrate. She swatted it away, rolled over, and blinked at the empty pillow beside her. Cold to the touch, she stretched lazily, pulled the sheets tighter, and smirked to herself. He was probably sulking in the garage again, pretending to reorganize tools that nobody had touched since Obama's second term. Or maybe he went for one of his walks around the lake. That's what boring men do, isn't it? They stew in silence and come back when they are ready to apologize for being too sensitive. It wasn't until 9:13 a.m. that she checked her phone. No texts, no missed calls. Odd, considering Daniel usually sent a good morning text or some dry note about the sprinklers malfunctioning. He had this pathetic ritual of checking the watering schedule every morning, like it was a nuclear launch code. She rolled her eyes, her thumb hovering over the call button. She went to the kitchen instead, popped a bagel in the toaster oven, and flicked on the news. Something about a strike, something about interest rates, something about a billionaire with a rocket ship fixation. Whatever. She ate in silence. It felt weird. By 11:02 a.m., she was annoyed. She called him, straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," she said in a slightly sing-song tone, like she always did when she thought he was being dramatic. "You win. All right, come back. The house is like a tomb." She didn't say, "I miss you." She didn't mean it. She expected him to call her back sheepishly at 2 p.m. with a grocery bag and a passive-aggressive comment about her leaving dishes in the sink. At noon, she called again. Still voicemail. Now it was starting to sting. She went to his study. The door was ajar. The desk clear. The laptop on the charger, unplugged. The bottom drawer, the one he always told her not to touch because of the sensitive files, was empty. She opened the closet. His winter coat was still there, but his old army duffel bag was gone. She called his work line out of habit. "We're sorry. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." She laughed out loud. Such drama. She tossed her phone onto the couch and muttered, "He'll be back." By 3:45 p.m., she had called him 4 more times. Left 2 voicemails. She sent a text that was halfway between flirty and accusatory. "So, are you really doing this?" "Who?" "Running away." Still nothing. By 5:01 p.m., she made herself an extra dry martini and drank half of it before walking to the bedroom. She wrenched open his side of the closet. The shirt still hung, the shoes still lined up, but the little wooden box where he kept his old IDs, cash, and what he called his just-in-case kit was gone. She sat down, stared at the wall. This wasn't like him. Daniel didn't do chaos. He didn't do silence. At 6:03 p.m., she finally caved and texted her father. Heard from Daniel. No response. At 6:17 p.m., she called. No answer. At 6:24 p.m., he called her back. His voice was clipped, dry, like he was talking to a tenant who had missed rent. "Call me now." That was it. No concern, no affection, just 3 words. She blinked at the screen. Reread it 5 times. Her stomach began to twist. Not with guilt. Monica didn't do guilt, but with something dark, something unknown, something off script. She called him. He answered immediately. "Dad, what's going on?" she demanded. "What the hell did you say to Daniel?" "What did I say?" Richard exhaled sharply. "You're the one who should be telling me what you said to him last night." She hesitated, suddenly unsure of her tone. "I told him to leave." "It wasn't. He always takes things so." "Jesus." "Monica," her father said, his voice dropping. "I just got off the phone with Ren at the bank. They've removed your husband's name from the primary guarantee agreement. Do you understand what that means?" "No. What?" Her voice was sharp, but getting smaller. "The house. The accounts. My firm. Daniel wasn't just a co-signer, Monica. He was the guarantor. He was the stabilizer." "What are you talking about?" "The bank said it's all being reevaluated. Every instrument tied to him is under immediate review. The covenant waivers are void. Monica, the cross-collateralization clause is active." She stared at her own reflection in the black TV screen across the room, wine glass still in hand. "You need to fix this," her father said. "I didn't know he could do that." There was a pause. Then her father said, flatly, "He was always quiet, Monica. That didn't mean he was weak. You pushed a man who never made a sound into silence. And now, silence is all you're going to get." The line went dead, and for the first time that day, Monica realized she wasn't playing house anymore. She was sitting in the wreckage of one. Her father's second call came at 7:31 p.m. No niceties this time. No lecture. No breathing room. "Monica, are you sitting down?" She rolled her eyes, holding the phone between her shoulder and cheek as she swirled her second martini with the olive pick. "Jesus, Dad, calm down." "What? Daniel's ignoring you too? Must be some male menopause thing." There was a pause. A dangerous one. "Listen carefully. Daniel used the house, your house, as cross-collateral for my entire business portfolio. Do you even know what that means?" Monica's fingers tightened around the glass. "What? I didn't think he. What do you mean, use the house?" "It's paid off. I just updated the backsplash last month." "This isn't about the backsplash." "Monica," her father growled. "Without Daniel's primary guarantee, the bank is entitled to reclassify the note. That means every credit line tied to that guarantee is now being reviewed as unsecured. Do you know what that does to our ratios?" "No," she said curtly. "I don't speak panic banker. I'm not one of your analysts." "You're about to become one," he snapped. "Because Ren just froze 3 accounts." 3. I got the notice 15 minutes ago. They cited alteration of guarantor status without replacement. Daniel revoked his primary clause. He's not just gone, Monica. His UN-linked. And now I'm exposed." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The olive slid off the pick and sank to the bottom of a glass. "I told you to respect him," her father hissed. "I told you to stop treating him like a damn supporting character in your life. But you just had to keep poking, didn't you? And now you've set fire to the one man holding the umbrella over this whole damn family. I didn't know he was tied to your business." "Oh, for Christ's sake," he boomed. "He was a quiet backstop, the one who got us out of that debt jam, the one who kept us compliant during the recession when everyone else was going under. You think I asked you to marry him just because he brought his own tools and liked to barbecue on Sundays?" Monica blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying your husband, was apparently the keystone holding up a very expensive arch, and you just kicked him out because you thought you were clever. There was a pause. Her chest was tight. I didn't think he'd actually leave. Her father exhaled sharply through his nose. You didn't think, because you've never had to. Daniel thought. Daniel did the math. Daniel protected you. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, still holding the phone, the glass forgotten on the carpet. Her voice was lower now. So what happens now? What happens? Her father said, his voice now low and shaky. What happens is the bank is going to reevaluate every loan we have. I've already gotten 2 demand letters for asset exposure. If they reclassify the note, they can demand immediate liquidity. And Monica, there is no liquidity. Not without Daniel. She was sweating now, but the room wasn't hot. Then call them, she said quickly. Explain it's a misunderstanding, that he's just throwing a tantrum. He already pulled the documents. Monica, he filed them 2 weeks ago. This was planned. He had contingency declarations recorded at the registrar's office. There's a paper trail, dated, notarized, on record. He's not throwing a tantrum. He's executing a decision. She was on her feet now, panic flickering in her chest like static. But why didn't he tell me? Because you told him he was nothing. Because you said he couldn't survive without you. And he decided to prove you wrong in the only way that mattered. Financially, structurally, and irrevocably. Her legs were moving before she realized it. To the study, to the drawer she hadn't opened in years where he kept files, folders, contracts. Gone. Of course, they were. She stumbled back to the living room. What do I do? She whispered. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, pray that man isn't as ruthless as you thought he was. Because if he is, we're not just facing reevaluation. We're facing foreclosure, an audit, a reputational wipeout. But it was just a comment, she mumbled, more to herself than him. It was just a stupid argument. No, her father cut in. It wasn't. It was a trigger, and you gave him the reason he needed to pull it. The line went dead again. Monica sat in the too quiet living room, the phone sliding from her hand, her mind racing not with grief or anger, but with a raw, rising fear. She had provoked a man who never raised his voice, and now his silence was dismantling everything around her, one clause at a time. The call came shortly after 9 a.m. the next morning, while Monica was still in her bathrobe, staring at the rim of her bathroom sink as if it had personally offended her. She hadn't slept. She'd spent most of the night pacing between his closet and the front door, waiting for Daniel to show up, or at least call, explain, apologize. Nothing. The mirror had offered her a version of herself she didn't quite recognize. Smudged mascara, sallow skin, a mouth slightly agape, like she couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Graham Peters' work. She answered, trying to inject some fake cheer into her voice. Graham? Hi. Good morning. What's up? What the hell? Monica. She jerked back from the phone, her heart hammering. I'm sorry. What? Our bridge loan just got recalled. Do you have any idea what that does to our cash flow? Her brain was still in a fog, but the name rang a bell. The bridge loan. The one the company got 3 months ago to smooth out that shaky acquisition. She blinked. I don't understand. Why are you calling me about that? You don't understand. Graham sounded like he was pacing or breaking things. You don't understand. Monica, I personally vouched for you. I put my name on the stability profile we submitted to Beale. You were our anchor hire. Remember? They extended that line because I guaranteed you had no external volatility. And guess what popped up in this morning's damn review audit? She gripped the counter. Graham, what are you talking about? Why does this have to do with Daniel Jacobs? He roared. Your husband. The man who quietly co-signed the secondary guarantee behind our capital reserve clause. Don't play dumb with me. Monica, you used him. She flinched. What do you mean, I used him? Oh, come on. Graham barked. You brought him to that dinner with the Beale partners. You encouraged them to ask about his credentials, and he impressed the hell out of them. You told me to let him help shape the risk mitigation strategy. She remembered the dinner, sort of. The wine had been flowing. Graham had been bragging about their new momentum. She had encouraged Daniel to speak up when the conversation turned to market resilience. He'd made some dry joke about asset reallocation, and the old money guys had eaten it up. She thought she was scoring points. That was months ago. I didn't know he actually co-signed. Graham cut her off. Co-signed the damn security guarantee. Quietly, like everything else he did. And now Beale did a secondary check because of the Costello firm news. Oh yeah, your father's making headlines. And guess what? Daniel's whole profile is scrubbed. Gone. Assets sealed. Trust protected. Debt reallocated. They revoked the loan. Monica, effective immediately. Her mouth opened and closed. Graham, I swear I didn't. They've already frozen the queue for disbursement. And without that, we don't make payroll by the 18th. You want to explain to 72 employees why their checks are bouncing. She sagged against the wall. This isn't my fault. You think Bill cares about that? He snapped. You think reputational risk is about fault? You were supposed to be our adult in the room, the stable executive married to the man with enough quiet money to keep the floor from caving in. Silence. Where is he? Graham demanded. I don't know. You don't know? You don't know. I told him to leave, she whispered. Graham laughed a dry, stunned laugh, with no humor. Well, congratulations, he said. He did, and he took the damn scaffolding with him. Click. The call ended. Monica stood there, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, her heart trying to climb out of her chest. Her head was buzzing with fragments. Stability profile, co-signed, trust protected, assets, missed payroll. She walked to the living room like a sleepwalker and sank onto the sofa. The TV was still on, muted, some daytime show with smiling people baking. She suddenly hated them. The ground felt less like solid earth and more like ice, thin, cracking, groaning under a weight she hadn't realized was there. It wasn't just her father. It wasn't just her marriage. Daniel had been everywhere, quietly reinforcing every corner of her life. Her home, her job, her status. And now that he had withdrawn, it was all coming apart. She stayed at the front door again, still closed. No jingle of keys. Her phone buzzed again. A text from a coworker. Are you okay? RHH is looking for you. Her blood ran cold. No emojis. No warmth. Just the kind of text people send when they're trying to get out of the blast radius. She looked at her hands and realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had nothing to hold on to. Daniel had taken nothing with him when he left, except somehow the flaw. At 11:17 a.m., Monica was driving 70 kilometers per hour in a 50 zone, her hands gripping the wheel like a novice. She hadn't combed her hair. She hadn't eaten. Her phone had already died once from being checked in a panic. Text from her dad. 3 missed calls from Graham. 2 co-workers who were suddenly taking an interest in her. And Daniel, still nothing. The bank's glass building loomed into view like a courthouse. It had always seemed sleek, modern, expensive, in that quiet, predatory way. She parked as if she was late for a meeting, didn't bother to fix her shirt, and strode through the doors with the kind of urgency reserved for people trying to undo disasters they didn't see coming. At the teller's desk, she dropped her ID on the marble surface and whispered, I need to speak to someone in private. Urgent. The woman behind the counter, in her early 30s, with flawless eyeliner and a professionally cautious smile, glanced at the screen, then at Monica. Name? Monica Costello-Jacobs. A flicker, that subtle shift in facial tension when a stranger recognizes your name. Not because you're famous, but because you're flagged. 1 moment. 5 minutes later, a man in a tailored gray suit escorted her into a glass-walled office and gently shut the door. Miss Costello-Jacobs, I'm Alan Moser, Relationship Management. How can I help you today? She sat too quickly, almost missing the chair. My husband, she said, breathlessly. Daniel Jacobs. I think I need to see our accounts. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Moser opened a sleek laptop, typed a few things, then paused. Would you like me to review all associated accounts, or just the joint ones? All of them. Everything. He nodded. He clicked a few more times, then another, longer pause. Ms. Jacobs, I see here that several accounts linked to Mr. Jacobs were transferred completely out of our institution last week. The remaining accounts were closed this morning. What? She said, the word cracking for the first time. Additionally, a revocation notice was filed against the joint mortgage last night at 11:01 p.m. She shook her head. No, that can't. What does that even mean? It means the mortgage is no longer protected by Mr. Jacobs' primary guarantee. The property has been reclassified as an acceleration instrument, which under the terms of the original 2020 loan agreement, allows the lending entity to call for full repayment in the event of a significant profile change or elevated exposure risk. She blinked, the words washing over her like a foreign language. Are you saying the house is, what? In jeopardy? I'd say it's currently under a green review. We've received a conditional flag for reevaluation, including its use as cross-collateral, which was detailed in your husband's business instruments addendum. No, she said, shaking her head like a child refusing to accept bad news. The house is paid off. We finished the payments last year. There is no mortgage. There is no traditional mortgage, Mercer corrected gently. But the property was leveraged as a debt instrument, a quiet one, filed through a separate entity. It was protected by your husband's assets until he withdrew that protection. She stood up. There must be a mistake. I didn't authorize this. I didn't even know. He handed her a printout. It was a scanned document. Daniel's signature, Clay, legal, dated, and above it, spousal guarantee revocation, effective immediately. The rest of the paper might as well have been blank. She sat back down. Mosa cleared his throat softly. Do you have access to Mr. Jacobs' new financial advisors or representatives? If this was a misunderstanding. It's not, she whispered. He paused again. Well, he said slowly, I'd recommend you contact your attorney. There may be ways to renegotiate if the property is transferred into a neutral holding entity. She didn't respond. Her phone buzzed on the table. New email from notcashins.com. Subject, green assessment. Residential asset overlay. She opened it with trembling fingers. As part of the ongoing financial restructuring due to the shift in guarantor status, the residential property located at 431, redacted, is now under conditional green review pending asset stability assessment. At the bottom of the message, a note read, this action is automated and irreversible. She stayed at it, then at the paper in her hand. The man across from her, the glass office, the world outside moving on without her. Daniel had timed it all. The transfer, the revocation, the notices, even the damn email. She stood up without a word and walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor, past the front desk, past the smiling security guard who nodded at her as if nothing had happened. In the parking lot, she leaned against her car and let out a slow, bitter laugh, the kind that turns into a sob halfway through, and then just stops, as if it's not worth the energy. She pulled out her phone, tapped Daniel's name again. Call failed. She didn't leave a message. What could she even say? That she'd mocked a man who had been holding up the walls without her ever noticing? That she'd laughed in the house he was using to shield her from the storm? That now, thanks to a few signatures and an unbreakable silence, she was no longer the woman who had a life. She was the woman who was on the outside of it, watching the windows go dark. The staircase wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. Daniel had chosen it carefully, tucked between a closed-down antique shop and a dental office in a strip mall that hadn't been renovated since the early 90s. But the food was consistent, the lighting dim, and most importantly, the staff knew how to mind their own business. He sat in the corner booth, the leather creaking slightly under his weight, sipping an old-fashioned with a single cube of ice melting slowly in the glass. Across from him, his sister Karen was laughing softly at a story her husband Brian was telling. Something about the time Daniel had accidentally installed the ceiling fan upside down and blamed it on rotational turbulence. It was a lie, of course, but Daniel didn't correct him. He didn't need to. The story wasn't for accuracy. It was for warmth. The fourth seat was occupied by Martin Lee, an old friend from the construction days, a Vietnam vet with smart eyes, a quiet man, even more so than Daniel, if that was possible. He'd seen the worst in people and never forgot it. When Daniel called him 3 weeks ago and asked if he still had that spare cabin in Foxhall, Martin said, "Do you still drink scotch?" Daniel said he did. The cabin was his. Their steaks arrived, medium rare all around. Brian started cutting into his before the plate even hit the table. Karen raised a toast to new beginnings. Daniel nodded. No smile, but his eyes softened. He raised his glass, clinked it against hers, and took a slow sip. His phone vibrated on the table. He ignored it. It vibrated again, and again. Karen glanced at the briefly illuminated screen. Monica Mobile. It vibrated again. Richard Mobile. Then Graham Peters work. Then back to Monica. I guess she noticed, Karen said quietly, cutting into her steak with surgical precision. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at his plate like it was a chessboard he'd already won. She's not calling to apologize, finally, he said. She's calling because her world is shrinking, and she thinks I'm the fire escape. Brian leaned back in his seat, chewing, then said, "You're not going to answer it." Daniel didn't even look at the phone. No, he said simply. The time for talking was before she weaponized condescension. The phone buzzed again. Same name, same loop. He reached over, tapped the power button, and silenced it. The device went dark, face down on the table. There was a long pause. Martin finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You sure you're all right, Dan?" Daniel leaned back with his glass in his hand. He didn't look like a man who had just torched the financial lives of 3 people, a corporate bridge loan, and a real estate legacy. He looked like a man who had finally taken off a too-tight shirt he'd been wearing for 30 years. "I feel like I just stepped out of a soundproof box," he said, like he'd forgotten what it felt like not to be edited. Karen watched him for a long second. "You were always too quiet for her. That wasn't your weakness. That was your strength." He nodded once. "She said I wouldn't last a week without her," he murmured, almost to himself. Another long silence. Then he raised his glass again, this time higher. To the quiet, he said clearly, the only answer some people deserve. They clinked their glasses. No dramatic music, no gloating, no long speeches about betrayal. Just the clatter of silverware on porcelain, the murmur of conversation from nearby tables, and the occasional sizzle from the kitchen. Daniel ate slowly, deliberately, savoring the piece like it was the main course. He didn't talk much. He never did. But he was listening, really listening, for the first time in years. In the absence of Monica's voice, that was the cleanest sound he had ever heard. The email arrived while she was sitting in the HR waiting room, her jacket sticking to her back with nervous sweat, her jaw so tight her muscles ached. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed just enough to keep her on edge. She stared at the blank walls, the frosted glass door, the untouched bottle of complimentary water on the table. She hadn't been in this room before. It was where they brought people who weren't quite fired but weren't quite welcome anymore. The past 48 hours had been a blur of fallout. Her father's voice had gone from angry to panicked to silent. He wasn't yelling anymore. He was whispering into lawyers' ears. Compliance flags had been raised after the bank pulled Daniel's primary guarantee. Suddenly, the firm's liquidity narrative was under scrutiny from regional regulators. There was whispering about asset misclassification, exposure violations. Words like fraud by omission were floating through the hallways. Graham, her boss, hadn't spoken to her since that explosive call, but she'd seen the staff Slack messages. People panicking about missed paychecks. Rumors that Beal was pulling other credit lines. Morale, already fragile, had shattered. 2 engineers quit mid-sprint. The HR representatives started rescheduling wellness reviews with senior staff. And Monica had gone from being the strategic director of operations to being a risk factor. It didn't come as a firing. No, that would have been too loud. It came as a gentle tap on the shoulder from the HR coordinator that morning, asking if she had 10 minutes for a quick sync. No explanation, just vague sentiments and forced smiles from the team as she gathered her things. By the time they walked her upstairs and asked her to wait in this room, her keycard had already been deactivated. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look right away. It had been a ceaseless noise. Calls from her father's lawyers, voicemail from her now ex-financial advisor, a pathetic trickle of text from people who once begged her for lunch and now said things like, "Hope everything's okay." It buzzed again. She sighed, picked it up, and glanced at the screen. It was a forwarded email with no sender's name, no message, just a subject line, accountability. At last, her stomach clenched. She opened it. Inside was a screenshot of a leaked internal memo. Judging by the watermark, strictly confidential, stamped diagonally across the page. It was from Beal Capital's internal risk audit team. A few phrases stood out in bold. Following the unforeseen revocation of the joint guarantee on instrument number 781CCX, our exposure model has been materially impacted. The inclusion of unverified guarantor entities and the reliance on verbal reputation endorsements is now considered a violation of due diligence protocol. And then her name. This includes the verified use of Monica Costello-Jacobs as a profile bridge asset without disclosure of the personal relationship nature between signatories. She felt the blood drain from her face. They were painting her as the responsible party, the one who allowed Daniel's name to be involved without proper disclosure. Her proximity to the guarantor had become a risk factor in itself. She scrolled to the bottom of the email. There, in plain text, recommended corrective actions, departmental authority removal pending review. So it was official. The HR meeting wasn't a check-in. It was to cut her loose. Outside the office door, she heard muffled voices. 2 women, maybe more. One said her name. Then laughter. Quiet, disbelieving laughter. She used to inspire that kind of whisper. But this was different. The tone had changed. Not admiration, not envy. Scorn. She looked back at her phone. The forwarded email had no header, no visible sender, but she knew who it was from. Daniel didn't need to sign it. He never said more than he had to. The message was clear. The woman who once rolled her eyes when he checked the sprinklers and paid the bills early was now sitting in a corporate purgatory, stripped of power. Her reputation crumbling like drywall behind cheap paint. It was all coming undone, and Daniel hadn't raised his voice. He just quietly turned off the lights, one circuit at a time. The package was small. No return address. Plain brown paper, sealed with an ordinary strip of clear tape. It was waiting on her desk when she got back from the HR transition meeting, the kind where nobody says fired, but everyone avoids eye contact and hands you a manila folder with your benefits and a half-hearted good luck. Her desk was already half cleared out. Someone, maybe from facilities, maybe HR, had packed her belongings into a generic cardboard box. Her framed quote about leadership was tipped on its side, as if even it had given up. The office plants were gone. All that was left was the nameplate, Monica Cedar-Cub's Director of Strategic Operations. It looked like a tombstone. She stared at the package. For a second, she wondered if it was from her father, maybe one of his lawyers. Some half-hearted gesture to show they were still in it together, still family, whatever that meant. Now, she peeled off the tape with trembling fingers and found a single item inside, a USB drive. No label, just a black plastic rectangle tucked into a folded note that read, in a simple typed font, "You should see what silence looks like." No signature, no sender, but she didn't need one. Her heart hammered faster. She stood up, locked her office door, drew the blinds, and sat back down. She inserted the drive into her laptop. A single video file, unnamed, just a timestamp. She clicked it. The feed opened with a grainy, familiar frame, the foyer of her house. Her foyer, the angle she used to complain about. Daniel had insisted on installing the security cameras himself instead of hiring someone like a normal person. She watched as her own figure walked into the frame, wine glass in hand, a loose blouse, mouth tight in a self-satisfied smirk. She turned to someone just off camera, Daniel. Her voice, clearer than she remembered, echoed through the quiet room. Go ahead, leave. You won't survive a week without me. The tone dripped contempt. Not anger, not hurt, just pure disdain. On screen, Monica waved a dramatic hand. You're nothing without me, Daniel. You just exist. You don't live. Then silence. Daniel walked into the frame, still quiet. Not hunched, not broken, just watching her like someone reading a book they've already finished. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys, placed them gently on the counter, and walked out of the frame. No words, no reaction, just the click of the door closing softly behind him. She stared at the screen, frozen, her own face caught mid-smirk. The cruel, final image of someone who thought they were in control. Then the footage faded to black. A new frame appeared. It was a scanned document. She squinted. The top line read, Loan Agreement Addendum Modification 4C. Below it, 2 signatures, Daniel Jacobs, and under his, a banker's countersignature. Date of signing, 2 weeks before that night. There, in the fine print, the clause lit up like a burn. In the event of marital cohabitation, revocation, or verified dissolution, trigger and reallocation of guarantee shall proceed at the guarantor's sole discretion. She blinked. He had already signed it. Before the fight. Before the day. Before the mockery. He hadn't reacted to her words that night because they didn't matter anymore. She wasn't the cause of his departure. She was the final confirmation. The file ended there. No music. No fade out. Just a frozen image of her face, her mouth still half open after delivering the line that would echo in her head for years. Go ahead. Leave. You're nothing without me. And then, silence. Real, absolute silence. Not just from the room, but from the now dry inbox. The phone that no longer lit up. From the work people who now barely met her eyes as they passed her desk. From her father, who hadn't spoken in 2 days, not since the regulators started asking for documents she couldn't access. From Daniel. Especially from Daniel. She sat motionless, staring at the dark screen. Not crying, not screaming, just understanding that silence wasn't the absence of noise. It was a verdict, and she had delivered the closing. Argument against herself. The gravel crunched under her heels as she got out of her father's car, still wearing the same jacket from 2 days ago, now rumpled with coffee stains on the cuff. Her hair was pulled back in the kind of last-minute, lazy bun you make when you've given up pretending to care. The sun was too bright for her pounding head, and the weight of it all, lost job, frozen accounts, tarnished name, pressed on her skull like a vice. She was back at her childhood home, not by choice. Her father had reluctantly offered it with sternness after realizing she had nowhere else to go. Her access to the Oak View property had been formally restricted that morning upon confirmation of the Green Review. The gate code had been changed. Her name removed from the Homeowners Association registry, as if she had never lived there. It was surreal and humiliating. The front lawn was dry. The sprinkler timer probably dead. The porch light was still on, though it was daylight. A courier stood by the front door with a clipboard in his hand, checking his watch. Monica Costello Jacobs. Her name sounded strange now, like a misprint. She nodded. He held out a pen. Sign, please. She signed without asking. Her hand trembled slightly. The man handed her a large white envelope, gave a curt nod, and went back to his van, which drove off before she even opened the flap. She tore it open cleanly and unfolded the papers inside. Several pages, bold lettering, legal format. Her eyes caught the header line. Notice of foreclosure. Intent to Levi Asset 4431. Redacted. She stopped breathing. The envelope slipped from her hands, the pages scattering like brittle leaves across the driveway. Her knees buckled slightly. Her hand shot out to the porch railing to steady herself. Her vision narrowed like a hot, regular tunnel. She bent down and snatched the first page off the concrete, her fingers scraping on the grit. Final warning. Pursuant to Clause 4C, guarantee reallocation complete. No protective guarantor remains in effect. Liquidation proceedings will commence within 30 days. She felt her chest cave in, a black hole right behind her sternum. She didn't cry. There was nothing left in the tank for that. Her body had already spent all its emotional currency in the last 4 days. She just stood there, breathing like someone had kicked her in the ribs. Then she saw it, at the end of the street, parked under the shade of an oak tree. The gray Silver Dew. Clean, still a dent on the passenger side, like always. The warm engine hood still ticking. Daniel. He was just there, watching, windows down, not hiding, not smug, just present. Her breath caught. She stepped off the porch, the papers still in her hand, and began to walk. Then faster, half running, half stumbling over the sloped gravel, her shoes catching in the driveway cracks. "Daniel," she yelled, her voice breaking. He didn't move. "Daniel, please. We can talk." Still motionless, her heels crunched against the gravel as she reached the edge of the street. She was 10 feet from the truck when he finally looked at her. His face wasn't angry. It was still. Tired, sure, but not bitter. Just resolved. She took another step closer. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know what I was breaking. You didn't even tell me." He blinked slowly, then reached for something. The power window switch. The window rose smoothly, effortlessly, sealing her out. He didn't say a word, didn't shake his head, didn't mouth an "I'm sorry," didn't nod goodbye. He just put the truck in gear and drove away. No squeal of tires, no dramatic pause, just a quiet motion. She stood there, in the middle of the road, holding a foreclosure notice in one hand, her phone in the other, the screen black. Still no answer. The wind picked up slightly. The pages fluttered behind her. And Monica Costello Jacobs, once the woman who laughed in the face of silence, who mocked the man who held it all together with patience and paperwork, was now just another person left on the shoulder of a life that no longer wanted her. She didn't scream. She didn't destroy. What would you have done in Daniel's place? Or have you ever witnessed someone finally unleash the power of their quiet strength? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.